stall, okay? If you're wondering what I'm doing right now, it's I'm stalling because I'm a little nervous. But, you know, what is there to be nervous about? Except that burp. I'm such a, like, gassy person just generally. It makes it difficult to do stuff like this, you know? Just burping on mic all the time. Alright. Alright. Hello, procrastinators. That's me. In the first episode of the podcast, we learned about rocks. Today, we're learning about rocks again, but this time, not about what they're made of or how to study them, but instead how to climb them. I haven't so much as climbed a tree for the better part of a decade, so with the help of a good friend of mine, let's settle down, get comfy, and learn some things. Hello?
Hey, buddy. How's it going?
Oh, there we go. Beautiful. All right. How's it going? It's going good. Let me just skirt. There we go. Look at that. All right. Hey, man. What's up?
I'm doing well, thanks. How's it going for you?
I'm doing all right.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here as well, as always. It's a beautifully hot day in Britain, and somehow still like a cooler day than the rest of the week. I don't know how it is for you where you are, but man.
Oh, it in Sheffield, it is super warm.
Yeah,
and it's been like mega overcast. So you know what they say? It's not the heat; it's the humidity.
Yeah, and the clouds trap it. It makes it so much worse. You get one day of sun, and then the next day's overcast, and it's just like 80% humidity and 100% misery. But yeah, it's been a really hot week, and it's only going to get hotter. So I think the last 2 days have been kind of a respite from like the intense heat, which is kind of blessed because I like to get the podcast done in the middle of the week. So yeah. Today we're joined by Ollie, and if you don't know Ollie, anyone in chat, Overwatch carry in a lot of streams, pretty, I guess, memorable member of the community, for want of a better word. But yeah, Ollie, if you want to just give us a little bit about yourself, let the people know who you are.
Yeah, so my name's Ollie. I'm an Aquarius, first and foremost.
Shut the fuck
up. Yeah, I've been a long time Duke lurker mostly. I'll come in to chat every once in a while. But outside of that, I'm Sheffield-based. I work in IT, and I do a lot of rock climbing.
The IT man by weekday, rock climber by weekend, I guess?
Yeah, well, pretty much whenever you can get it in. Like a lot of evenings, especially in the summer, because Sheffield's so close to the Peak District, there's a lot of really good climbing out there. That's like a 20-25 minute drive. So a lot of the times you can get into the peaks and just climb.
Shit as Yorkshire might be. At least you've got the Peak District nearby.
We have great rocks.
So yeah, I think you and I have known each other for a while, but kind of in a weird, kind of detached way. So for anyone who doesn't know, I basically grew up in Lincolnshire, and where I went to school, there were two schools in the same town that were like kind of rivals. Would you say they were rivals? It was
one of those like school kid rivalries where a fight would try and break out maybe once a month when nothing actually happened.
Sometimes the kids from Ollie's school would come and stand by the fence to our school.
Because well, you guys were fenced in and we were sort of free to roam.
Yeah. Actually, funnily enough, Rob, my best friend in primary school, actually ended up going to your school, and I went to the other one. Which, that was heartbreaking, I'll be honest. Someone was saying in chat that you're feeling betrayed because you thought you're my soulmate, but in reality, it's actually my best friend in primary school who left me to go to a different secondary school in the same town. It was brutal. But yeah, so have we ever met in real life? I feel like we might have met once or twice. I think so, but it would have been probably 8 years ago or something along those
I
lines.
think I remember the first time I met you, which was at your after prom party.
At Owens.
Yeah.
Oh, that shit was fucking wild. Yeah. Um. Yeah. No, that makes sense because like everyone was invited and it was just insanity. So yeah, Ollie
Yeah.
and I kind of go back, but in a weird way. So there you go. And I think obviously we sort of stayed in touch through games and stuff like that, which is the magic of the modern day. And I've seen pretty much through social media, you become like more and more of an invested like rock climber alongside Jack, who also went to my primary school, by the way, kind of fucked up. Also one of my best friends until he went to your school.
And now he's my best
There
friend.
you
He's
go.
in the room over. He's through there,
Oh,
actually.
there you go. So yeah, I'm kind of watching you guys through the looking glass, I guess. Become just intense rock climbers and looking like you're having a fucking blast. To be honest, like just out of nowhere, it seemed like to me. Probably, I don't know. When did you start rock climbing?
So I'm relatively new to the whole like climbing game. I started maybe during lockdown in the first lockdown in the UK anyway, so like April, May time 2020.
Yeah.
And that was just, well, we had nothing better to do but go out, and Jack was already sort of climbing and was like, "Hey, do you want to come give it a go?" I was like,
Right.
"Sure."
Was
And then
this like starting on indoor walls or?
no, so I started doing what's called trad climbing, where you turn up to a cliff or like a crag and you climb up, place all of your own gear as you go. So
Right.
like you may put like a steel block in and then hook your rope up to that and then continue on your way instead of having bolts that are already drilled into the wall.
So you started like your first experience was just out in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's definitely a baptism by fire in some respects, but
Yeah.
then on the other hand, it was like huge just stone steps that you couldn't really fall off of.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because I think I just pictured I guess I picture everyone who ever starts rock climbing like you go and do like an indoor wall type situation, which I think I probably did at some point in like cadets or something like that, where you just go to a climbing gym or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I guess yeah, like you said, it can be a baptism by fire, but you just start with the baby stuff first, right? Um, so I mean, I'm surprised actually that I always figured it was the other way around that you got Jack into it for whatever reason, but that's interesting. So it was, I guess in the first lockdown, like you said, there was nothing really better to do, and I guess you could just go out into the wilderness where there was nobody and climb around on rocks for a bit. Um, do you follow Geo Wizard on YouTube at all?
Yes.
So
Yes, I do.
you've seen the mission across Wales and all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
So for anyone who doesn't know, there's an English YouTuber called GeoWizard, and he does these things called like the straight line missions, which is where it started off with Wales, where essentially you try to cross Wales in a completely straight line. So during lockdown, he went to Scotland, and he tried to do a mission across Scotland, and he got caught by the police because you weren't allowed to cross the border. Did you see that?
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, I think about GeoWizard, just gone on a slight tangent.
Mm.
A lot of his videos are released 6 months or so after he's
Yes.
actually done them
Yeah,
because
because
of
he
the
does them in
statute
the
of
winter. Yeah.
limitations.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. For minor crimes in the UK, 6 months is statute of limitations on that, and trespassing is one of those crimes.
So he can't get in trouble for climbing through people's back gardens and stuff. So I didn't know that. I thought the reason was just editing because they're all recorded in the winter, which seems fucking mad to me as it is because it's cold, but
Mm.
all the brambles are like down, like they're not. There aren't nettles and brambles and thorn bushes growing everywhere. But yeah, no, I never realized it was a statute of limitations thing. Because yeah, so basically he tried to do the straight line mission across Scotland and he was camped out in some farmer's property. And the farmer came out and they seemed, after a weird interaction, they seemed like they'd be okay with it, but then they called the police on him anyway and they got basically kicked out of the country, which is wild. Because, well, I mean, I'm sure you didn't go up into Scotland and illegally try climb Ben Nevis or anything during lockdown, but yeah, it's just a weird thing that came to mind, like climbing in lockdown. And it was here in Wales as well, just to keep going off the rails. the Wales lockdown was pretty strict, like for a while, and they lifted aspects of lockdown in England before they did here, but that we had all of a sudden just random English people coming into the country, and there were like angry signs put up and shit where like bikers were coming over the border and stuff. Because I mean, I think the most divided I've ever seen Britain in general, other than when Scotland tried
Yeah.
to leave. But the whole idea of lockdown and the different variations of lockdown in the different countries is fucking bizarre. So you got started climbing out in the wild. Um, I assume you've been to climbing gyms and stuff though, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I definitely climb in gyms more nowadays,
Mm.
just out of the sheer fact that it's a lot easier. The routes are constantly changing. Uh, there's just a bit more variance as well in a
Yeah.
gym where like you find in certain areas you get a lot of the same style of climbing due to rock formations, or it could be a quarry. So you find that they're all generally the same sort of climbs. Whereas a gym, because it's plastic holds, the roof setters can get creative regardless of where you are.
Right. And then even in that regard they'll move them all around, and then you can pick different routes, right? Because they're like color coded, I guess, to some degree. So
Yeah,
yeah, you follow like one color of the different holds and stuff for sort of more challenging climbs. I'm gonna burp. Hold on. Excuse me. So do you prefer? I guess from sheer just a climbing aspect, right? Because obviously, when you go out and you sort of on an expedition to climb, whatever it might be, you've got the whole hiking aspect, camping aspect, and all of that shit. But just from a pure climbing standpoint, do you think you prefer it in the gym?
no, I do. I still think climbing outdoors is better, and I think that for a couple of reasons. First off, it's just nice to be out in nature.
Yeah,
I think, regardless of the activity you're doing, just being outside inherently makes things feel a lot nicer, a lot more open space above you. And then to follow up on that, the features are just a bit. There's a certain mental aspect when you're on a rock where it
yeah,
feels a bit more exposed. There's a certain immediacy about, oh, this is an actual cliff rather than just a plywood wall in a warehouse in an industrial estate.
yeah. And I guess there's more of an element of risk when you're out on a
Oh,
cliff.
yeah, absolutely. Like it could be that there's a loose rock that you're not aware of, which has been climbed hundreds of times before, but you're the person that pulls on it and it comes off. Things like that. And that's not a zero factor in the gym. Like you can still rip a hold off if it's not like securely placed,
Yeah,
but
but
it
then you get a
doesn't
nice
happen anywhere
like
near as much.
get a nice small claims court
Mm.
thing going, and that's all well and good, I guess, in a gym. What's have you had any accidents?
Uh, I've not had any accidents yet. Like touch wood,
Yeah,
like
of
I won't
course.
have any for a while. But no, the injuries I've ever had have been like just because of the situation we're in. Where, for instance, one of the last things I took a group of friends to do was a quarry called Dinorwic, just outside of Llanberis in Wales, and it's an old slate mine that was discontinued in the 1960s, but all of the old fittings are there, and there's still huge cliffs that you can sort of go explore, like abseil down, like go through caves and stuff. It's a great time.
Right.
However, having to help people abseil, you tend to stay at the bottom of the rope just to like give them a bit of confidence and tighten it up if they start to slip.
Yeah.
But trying to do that when there's like rocks, like just gravel more than anything, like it could be little pebbles, maybe 2-3 centimeters, but they come down with like a huge force and like yeah, just covered in like scuffs and bruises where you're just trying to make sure your friend's safe, but also not trying to get hit across the face by gravel.
Yeah, right. Because I guess as they're coming down, it's all fucking falling on you. So
Yeah.
you said the fittings are all still there. So is that like literally like fittings from the mine that you then use to like abseil and shit? Is that how that works?
Yeah, pretty much. So there's like just big cast iron ladders that are then nailed into the rock face itself
Yeah.
that maybe go between 10 and 20 meters in length.
Right.
And they are very wobbly. Some of the rungs are missing, but fundamentally they're big thick bits of metal. They're gonna hold you.
Right. Yeah. It's terrifying as it might be, I guess. And you just
Yeah,
fucking hitch up to one of those bad boys or whatever and belay your homies. That's the term, right?
that is you've got all the
I'm
jargon.
already yeah, I'm already on top of it. I know I'm supposed to be learning things here, but I'm basically already a master. I do remember climbing a wall once, but I don't remember the context of it at all. I remember being I feel like it must have been a cadets thing, but I have no idea. Um I mean, out of I think out of sort of the different sort of places I guess you can climb, shit like that, like old quarries and stuff, somehow is more spooky to me than a completely natural rock face, because you think like the whole purpose of this place being here was for people to hack chunks of the rock out. So I would just feel so kind of on edge the whole time.
Well, that is partially the point. Is that quarries are a bit more dangerous than a lot of crags because
Mm,
of exactly what you're saying.
yeah,
Like they've had like dynamite or like massive pneumatic drills like pounding into the rock, creating like tiny stress fractures or massive stress fractures that we then use to climb. But you can't negate from the fact that that rock is damaged and it's structurally just not as sound as
yeah.
like a smooth bit of granite that's never been touched by a hammer.
So this was the last sort of thing that you went on, and were you leading your group of friends? Is that what you said?
Yeah, so
Right.
a lot of the times, if there's someone who's just a bit more confident and a bit like with the knowledge to then set up an anchor safely at the top of the climb and things like that, because that's the skill that takes the most time to learn and is the least found one in your average climber who just goes to the gym,
Yeah.
because you're not used to placing bits of gear into the rock. You're not used to understanding how can I equalize this anchor, make sure that it's all being pulled properly, or what is a safe anchor to use.
Right.
Like that just takes time and practice, and someone telling you that's safe or what you've done there isn't safe. Don't use that.
Yeah, so just I guess take us through the process of scaling a rock face and putting the anchors in. I guess like what's your process there? Because like you said, if you're the one leading, you're the one going first. You've basically got to set them up for everyone else in the climb, right? So you're going without anything set up for you. So if you could take us through that process, that'd be great.
Yeah, so generally speaking, as you're starting off the ground, you want to try and find something just to quickly put in. So if you do fall maybe a couple of meters, it'll maybe like deaden the fall. Chances are you're still going to hit the deck again. But
Yeah,
like if your belay is smart, they won't actually hold onto the rope until you put your first clip into the wall and then got the rope attached to that, because they're essentially holding onto a rope for no reason. Like, and then you just, yeah, it's you'd be surprised how many people just don't understand that's a thing, that they should just have their hands up instead of keeping it down here, because
yeah,
what they're going to do. And then, yeah, then once you've placed that first gear, you just continue up that, doing the same thing. Just place a bit of gear, make sure it's safe, give it like a tug, make sure it's not going to come loose, or if it like walks in the crack that you try to place it in. Then once you get to the top, what you want to generally do is find 3 decent bits of protection, sometimes more, sometimes less if it's like a tree or a huge rock that you know is never going to move.
right.
And then once you got that anchor build, you generally want to use a acronym called SERENE, which is, oh god, now I have to test my own knowledge. Strong, equalized, redundant, efficient, and then there's no extension. So basically, they all fall into the same thing as make sure all the forces applied are coming through into a point that's safe. And
Yeah,
if those forces were to fail, you've got backup. And then I think that generally have like most of Serene. The only thing that is a bit of a weird one to explain is the efficient side of things. Because when people think efficient, they mean like using the least bit of bits. But a lot of time, it doesn't mean that. It means being timely,
yeah.
making
Okay,
sure that you set it up, make yourself safe as fast as possible.
right. Which makes sense.
Because, yeah, exactly. Like, because if you're doing it 5 meters off the ground, it's not the end of the world. If you've got someone like securing you, you're on a big shelf with great feet. But a lot of the times when you're doing big, like multiple pitches on a cliff, you find yourself stopping, creating an anchor on something that's quite small. You may have enough room for just your feet,
Right.
which a lot of times isn't ideal and isn't stable or safe. So you need to really sort of once you've got the basics down, you need to learn on getting that done quickly just to make sure you're keeping everyone safe.
Right. And when you're, I guess, when you're looking for, say, when you're first going up and you're looking for just sort of cracks and crevices and stuff, I mean, is that easy? In my head, like climbing a rock face, I can't picture that there are lots of like useful or particularly like safe, just random cracks here and there to sort of anchor bits of rope into. So, like, I guess it depends on the rock, but is it easy going up and just finding that route when you first go?
Well, a lot of the times you'll be working out of a guidebook or looking on climbing forums for climbs in a certain area at a
Right.
specific sort of like climbing grade that you're comfortable climbing at. And so you can have a rough idea of like by the pictures and the top, like the topo, like what you'll roughly need or like what will work, what won't.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense. Anything that's worth climbing, especially at an early level, probably a million people have climbed before at that point. So you've already kind of got it mapped out by people who've done it beforehand. Um, I just can't picture because you always see like crazy videos of people free climbing and shit,
Mm.
where which just it seems like a terrible idea, right? First and foremost. But yeah, I always think like if I was in that situation, I feel like I would be terrible at even finding like a handhold. You know what I mean? Like I'm sure it's something
Yeah.
that you get better at as you go, but I would be terrified of just getting to a point. And I mean, I even found this on climbing walls in a gym. You get to a point where you're like secure and you've got to look for your next move, and it just feels impossible, right? Like when you find if you find yourself in that situation, what's your, I mean, do you have sort of a go-to kind of way out? Do you feel it might be better to just come back down and attack it a different way, move like laterally if that's an option? Like what's the protocol?
Well, yeah, it's exactly that. You sort of take a moment, find somewhere like comfortable just to rest, make sure you're staying calm because as soon as you start panicking, like when your heart goes, your adrenaline goes, and you find that your body just does things that are really unhelpful for climbing. Like your hands start to clam up. You get a thing called like sewing machine leg or Elvis leg, where when you're stood on like a platform and your calf is taking a lot of the weight, it starts to sort of like flutter up and
Yes,
down.
yeah,
Yeah, and then as soon as you start feeling less stable, you feel more panicked. So
yeah,
and then it just compounds and it's a rough situation to be in. So yeah, generally speaking, like if you're on a cliff face, it's a lot of slow, sort of methodical reaching, grabbing, trying to test a hold, slowly like putting your weight on it, going, okay, is this body position right? Is my center of gravity in the right spot to then like take the weight off of my feet? And yeah, it does just come with time, understanding how your body moves on a wall
yeah.
and sort of having good awareness of where your hands and feet are meant to be.
Yeah, because yeah, that whole thing that you mentioned, the sewing machine leg or whatever, I can I envisage exactly that. I've been through exactly that. Like there's a memory buried in there of yeah, just one leg going absolutely fucking haywire, and then yeah,
Yeah.
as soon as you start to panic, shit like that starts to happen, and it just kind of spirals. So I guess yeah, it takes a lot of time to kind of steel yourself for situations like that. What's the most challenging climb that you've attempted so far?
Ooh. Indoors or outdoors?
Outdoors first, definitely.
Um, Outdoors, this was a climb that I didn't lead. I seconded. So I had a much stronger climber partner that day. And he was like, do you want to give this a go? I was like, sure. This was a route in a place called Lawrencefield in the Peak District.
Right.
And it was just a great big, like, split a crack, maybe 10 centimeters across, 8 centimeters across.
Okay.
And then that goes up about 6 meters. And then you come across this weird, dodgy ledge that you need to sort of get a high heel onto, like, and then reach up to the top of the move. It's very desperate, and climbing cracks, there's a bit of a knack to it, where instead of like holding on, like you would like grab like a door handle, you place your hand into the crack, make you like put your thumb into there, and then try and make a fist, and then you use the pressure on the backs in front of your hand
Oh
to then
god,
like
right.
pull yourself up.
Yeah, you kind of make your own sort of
Yeah, so instead of using
Pin.
like your forearms, you've like the muscles in your forearms, you're using the pressure in you just in the palm of your hand.
Right.
Which once you get that down, that technique down, it's actually a lot easier, and you can kind of do that for longer than just like holding on to normal holds because your forearms aren't getting tired, which is one of the main things that, especially when you're new to climbing, is where people fall down. Is their grip strength is just not up to doing long pitches of climbing.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely the hardest one that I've done for the grade. I think it was UK trad grade is weird, so this may take a bit of explanation in of itself.
Sure. Go on.
So it's E1 5B is the grade. Now, how British trad grades work is that E grade is like the sort of overarching grade of how hard it is, and then that 5B is the hardest move or like section of moves on the climb.
Right.
So but it is a bit more accurate because when you could say something's E1 5B, you mean there's a little bit of protection and the moves are kind of hard. Whereas if you have E1 5A, the moves are easy, but in terms of protection as you're going up, there's not a lot in there, so there's potentials for big fall.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, a lot of countries just don't use it because it's a weird one to get your head around. And just saying like 513 is a lot easier in the States because
Right.
people just say,
Okay.
oh yeah, it's kind of hard.
I don't know. There's a nuance to it that makes sense, but yeah, it does seem like a weird system to sort of get your head around.
Yeah, yeah. Once you get your head around it, though, you can sort of roughly judge what a climb is going to be like.
Yeah,
And
you can sort of
a
picture it
lot.
better in your head than just like a straight grade for the whole thing, I guess.
Mm.
So, I guess well, what's the toughest indoor climb you've managed then? Because of course, indoor climbs is a very different environment, but I imagine that kind of gives it I guess the potential to be more challenging in that way because you know it's going to be sort of. Well, let me rephrase. I guess your willingness to push yourself harder in an indoor environment is going to be greater because the risk is a little bit lower, right? Because it's a much more
Yeah.
controlled environment. So I guess in that case, it's going to be much more of a sort of a physical challenge than a mental one. So
Mhm.
yeah, what was the most difficult indoor climb you've done so far?
The hardest grade I've climbed to is 6C. So that's like, it's not bad. I mean, it's not like elite or world class.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
like your average Joe after like maybe a year or so of like climbing a few times a week and like watching what they eat and training a bit could achieve that pretty easily. But for me, that was a struggle because I don't particularly train. I just like to go outside and climb relatively easy and
Doing
just
is
have a
the
nice time.
training, I guess, rather than like
Yeah.
actually like working out or anything like that. You just do it, and then you kind of get fit in that way. Which yeah, I guess brings me to because you mentioned your forearms get brutalized, right? There's a lot of just holding yourself in place so that you don't die. Um, I mean, is there any kind of workout regimen for climbers specifically other than just going and climbing? Like,
Yeah, there's a fair bit. So you'll find that if you go to any gym, a lot of climbers will be in their downtime just training their finger strength. I mean, I'm fiddling with one now. It's just a little rubber band that you put around your fingers and just you stretch it out. And this is really good for recovery because it makes your fingers use the outside part, and instead of like clinging, you're extending your fingers. So it's just putting resistance on in a different
yeah,
way to just make
hey,
them
yeah,
stronger
yeah.
and
It's
less prone to injury.
basically just resistance bands for your fingers, pretty much at that point.
Yeah. And then beyond that, you'll find that there's a lot of people doing yoga or flexibility training because, again, a lot of harder climbs demand you to have a certain level of flexibility or a certain level of reach to be able to complete them.
You don't want to be
It's
holding
like,
a weird position because then you get a cramp as well. Fucking Christ, and that's
yeah,
terrifying. Yeah, because you've got to, yeah, like you said, you've got to reach, you've got to be flexible, and on the difficult climbs, if there's this one specific part where you've got to make some really long reach, or you're stuck in one weird position where the only holds you've got are like awkward to say, I guess, to say the least. You're gonna start to actually cramp up, and then that panic sets in again, and it's just that whole process of trying to get yourself out of the situation without completely losing it. All right, so I guess that's a little bit on your own experience. Now, when I first messaged you about coming on the podcast, you mentioned one of the first things you said was about the history of climbing. So, do you want to give us a little crash course on the history of recreational climbing? I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, climbing itself is just ancient. Like I think one of the oldest known competitions was one in Kazakhstan in like 350 BCE or something crazy like that, where it was just like people just trying to get to the top of this mountain fastest. Now, where I see it starting as like a recreational thing is like Victorian era, where it's just a lot of wealthy people from Europe going to the Alps and just summiting mountains, like, and then just go to the top, saying, planting their flag and going, "Oh yeah, that's for the Queen,"
If
and
they
moving
don't
on.
die, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and a lot of them did. Holy crap, they
Yeah,
used awful equipment. There's a lot of like hemp ropes and just steel just hammered into cracks and hobnail boots. It's insane that they did this stuff then, honestly.
my D&D character
And then
feels targeted right now. By the way, all right, how dare you? Hemp rope has got me a long way in my D&D campaign.
oh, hemp rope in D&D is just busted though. It's invincible. Can't be killed.
Right, exactly, and you get like 50 feet of it in your dungeoneering pack, and it'll last you for the whole campaign.
Hmm. Preach on that. Right. But then sort of going past that throughout the like 20s, 30s and 40s, you do see an uptick in the amount of a sense of just smaller crags across the UK. And then World War II happened. And that's where you found a lot of like surplus like age climbing equipment so you can like get certain sky hooks and things like that. And nylon rope is the big one
Yes,
that
right.
became massively available. You sort of upped the amount of falls people could take, and there's longer of it, so you could just do more. So people were like upping the grades,
And fucking
and
mass produced like mad, of course. So yeah,
mm, yeah. So there's a huge uptick then, and then that only sort of increased throughout like the 60s and 70s, 80s, and then it sort of got to the 90s, and that's where people sort of took it, in my opinion anyway, to the next level in terms of like training hard, exclusively benefiting their climbing abilities. You've got some absolute legends in the UK like Ben Moon, Jerry Moffat, who are like putting up these insane climbs that are still like cutting edge to this day. And they were doing it whilst on the dole, going back to Sheffield, picking up their dole, going back out to the Peak District for 2 weeks, and only coming back once they'd run out of money. And that's all they did. And
that's a
then yeah,
lifestyle.
it it is it definitely cements that stereotype of a climber being a bit of a dirtbag.
Yeah, just living out on a mountain for a couple of weeks on your dole money. I mean, it sounds like the life, just not the
Yeah.
life for me, I guess. Because I mean, I I wouldn't last. I wouldn't last in the wilderness, let alone climbing a rock. Um, which which does just I just want to say, and I said this to Ollie before we actually started the podcast. It was yesterday. Um, so for anyone who's not familiar with Critical Role, or at least Liam O'Brien and Sam Riegel, they do this show called All Work No Play, which, funnily enough, actually started as a podcast. It was a podcast that was just the two of them, and they would just kind of chat shit for a while, but it evolved into this fucking awesome YouTube show, which if you haven't checked out, you got to see it, because I guess in some way partially inspired this. But basically, they undertook like any random sort of different activity that they'd never tried before as just a way to kind of broaden their horizons or whatever. And I was saying to Ollie that if this podcast ever evolves into something like that, then I'm definitely gonna go out at least on a hike with you, possibly a climb, but no promises, because I'm not in shape right now, but I actually plan to be by sort of the end of this year, so we'll see about that. But yeah, if this ever does turn into some sort of video series, because I mean, imagine, and this is just pure speculation, but even based on just like the guests I've had so far, one, going out hiking with the boys, learning how to not die in a tent, going over to America, taking lake bed samples with some geologists, anything like that. It would be cool as fuck, right? But yeah, I think because you've come to Wales a couple of times, and you mentioned like next time you're sort of in the neighborhood, we'd have to link up and go and see how a hike would do. And I think that would be fucking awesome if any sponsors got on board for that shit and were like, yeah, we'll sponsor a climb or some shit. That would be fucking awesome, right? But but yeah, because I guess where I used to live in Wales, I can't remember what it was, Llandovechtli or something like that, um, was right in the beacons or like in Brecon. And I mean, even here, like out of my window, I've got a view of some kind of mountain or hill or something ridiculous. The Welsh landscape is nuts. So yeah, I mean, Britain, I guess within Britain generally, we've got what, Ben Nevis, and that's probably the only one I could name. Did you climb Ben Nevis at some point?
Yeah, I went up it last June.
How was that?
Oh, it was great. I had the cheapest equipment possible. I think my pack, all in all, like all my gear, maybe cost me less than 200 quid.
Yeah.
So, like, super budget. But doing it in June, like, the only thing you've really got to watch out for is like midges. And yeah, it's one of those ones where it looks really daunting, but in reality, the path is pretty straightforward if you're fit enough to walk up it.
It's like more of a hike than anything else, I guess, to get to the top
Yeah,
of it.
yeah. Well, the only issue is it has snow on it most of the year on the actual summit. So like we got up there and it was like, yeah, I think it was like mid-June. Like at the base of the mountain, it's 23 degrees, 24 degrees, and then you get to the top and it's closer to 4 or 5,
Jesus.
and you're wading through a foot and a half of snow.
No, it's that actually is really surprising to me, especially in the UK. Just, I mean, does that mean you have to start out in shorts but pack fucking like puffer jackets and shit? How does that work
Yeah.
out?
Uh, well, you sort of just have to accept the fact that it's a bit cold because I was there in shorts and then just like running tights,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
just had a hoodie and my waterproof jacket. And to be honest, when it's not zero, and because you're constantly moving and
Yeah.
constantly making your way up the mountain, you heat up really fast. So a lot of the times you're advised not to layer up and then start. Like the saying that every sort of like guide or mountain leader will tell you is be bold, start cold. Like
Right.
just
Because you'll
put
warm
up put
yourself
up with
up.
it for 10 minutes. Put
Yeah.
up with it for 10 minutes, and you'll be fine by the time you get going.
What sort
Whereas
of altitude is it?
Ben Nevis is, I think it's about 1,300 meters, 1,350.
Which is that too short to like feel altitude? Not well, I guess altitude sickness. Where when the air starts to get thin, do you notice that sort of thing on in any mountain in the UK?
No,
No,
no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't really become an issue until like a few thousand feet above that.
fair enough. I'm trying to think what other like. Well, actually, better way to ask. In the UK, what's the dream climb? In fact, two categories, right? Because again, this is a very like there's very different sort of experiences. One, the dream climb that you're kind of aiming to beat in terms of a challenge, right? And
Mhm.
then the dream in terms of just like general experience of like sightseeing and being able to say you've done it.
In terms of like a challenge, there is a climb in one of my local crags called the Sentinel,
Right.
which is a pretty tricky one. It's quite exposed. You're basically hugging this massive bit of stone, and it's a lot of not grabbing on and just using friction on slopes and just
Right.
pulling your body in the correct way to keep on the rock. It's quite a technical style of climbing that like the Peak District is known for. And that to me, when it was one of the first climbs that I looked at and thought, that's really fucking cool. I
Yeah.
want to give that a go.
Right.
Uh, and then there's one more that is available not too far from me called London Wall, which is one of the like it's known as one of like the best crack climb routes in the UK. And again, it's you just look at it, it's a blank bit of stone, and all you've got is this like big long track that you can see that's in the wall. it's a very aesthetically pleasing climb to look at, and apparently it's just a great climb to go up.
Right, fair. When you when you sort of demonstrate crack climbs, there's a lot of this action. So I'm picturing
Yeah.
like a vertical crack or near vertical crack in the face of the rock that you're just having
Yeah.
to like jam your hand into to pull yourself up, pretty much.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Like you normally see them like called like splitters, where it is just huge bits of just nothingness in the wall, and then
Yeah.
it's just put your hand in, make it fat, and then just put all the pressure through your hands.
Because that sounds nuts. I mean, yeah, that pretty
It,
much just sounds like madness to me.
it is. It's one of those ones where until you do it, it looks unsafe, and
Yeah.
I mean,
Because like, what do you do with your feet in that situation? Are they just
same
jammed
situation.
in one above the other?
So audio listeners, many apologies.
Shoes
But
coming out.
essentially, what you do, the shoe is out. You want to sort of get it into the crack. So as it comes in, and then you twist it, and then that cams it into place, and you have all the pressure like on either side of your foot,
And
because
man.
your foot's much wider than the crack a lot of the
Right.
time.
And you're just putting as much pressure on that sort of
That you're using a torsion in your
Yeah.
leg to keep it going.
Yeah, at a glance, I guess if you're watching someone do that, it sounds nuts. But I guess at the end of the day, hand wider than crack, foot wider than crack. I'm sure mathematically nothing could
Yeah.
go wrong, right? And when you're putting it, well, I guess when you're climbing with, like, well, I mean, what gear do you take on a climb?
All sorts. So first and foremost, when you're new to climbing, or if you're just climbing like a sport climb or top rope where you don't need to put your own gear in,
Right.
the things I always recommend to people is you need a helmet, you need a harness, like a good fitting harness that you can sit comfortably in for an extended period of time. Because in a lot of climbing gyms, they give you these just awful ones that use the same material that seatbelts use,
Yeah.
which is very light and it's pretty durable, but it's not comfortable to sit in. So
Especially when it's clasped around
for-
your junk for an extended period of time.
yeah, you really got to try a harness to make sure it doesn't trap your nuts as
Yeah.
a dude. Then going beyond that, if I'm just climbing a sport route where the protection is already like bolted into place, all I'll carry up with me is quick draws, where these are just carabiners on a little sling. So you hook one carabiner into the hoop on the wall, and then you put your rope through the other one, and that's what's keeping you going up. Now, if I'm doing trad, the additions to that is a lot more gear because you're having to build the own protection and use the features. So we use things like nuts and chocks, which is just massive hunks of metal or very small hunks of metal attached to wire, which then you just slot into a crack or feature and then put your carabiners through them, and then you rope through the carabiner. Now, climbing again has evolved, because that's like old school. They've been doing that since the Victorian era. Throughout the 80s and 90s, they started developing things called spring-loaded camming devices.
Right.
Which I will pull up one now.
Oh,
With
Christ.
my rack. Yeah, for reference, this is most of this would get strapped to my harness if I'm going on a climb.
It's like a janitor's keychain of ropes.
Straight up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what a camming device does is, it's spring-loaded, and as you pull it back, the jaws at the top bend in. So then once that's in, you can put it into the rock, open it back out, and that'll actively lock itself in. So when you're putting force on it, it's trying to make itself wider, but it can't.
Right.
So they're super solid and they're super easy to put into cracks, and way more beginner friendly than trying to work out how to fit a nut in.
So yeah, so when you're climbing something like a crack, right? You're just basically slotting in the spring-loaded. What was it? Spring-loaded cam device.
Just call them cams.
Cams. So that's how you're essentially keeping yourself safe when you're climbing something like that, sort of ridiculous, I guess. Do you have any strong opinions on free climbing? Is it something that you'd ever try yourself?
Yes, it is something that I try myself. I mean, I was in the Lake District just this weekend gone, and there were a few climbs that I'd done and thought to myself, I could feasibly come back here and climb that. But it takes a certain mindset to be able to comfortably do that
Yeah.
because, like, on a lot of climbs, the moves aren't hard. It's just that you're doing them in a very exposed position on the side of a cliff. And that psyche is really hard to break and get
Right.
past if you're relatively new to climbing. So you definitely find yourself, even I do it because placing your own gear is inherently just a very scary thing to trust. You climb a lot easier than what you could do in a gym.
Right.
And so I think I will do it at some point, but I've not got to the point where I'm so confident climbing. It's like just moving like that is nothing to me. I still make mistakes as a climber. I
Yeah.
still get fatigued on like longer pitches.
Because, like you said,
So
I mean, you've been able to look back on climbs and think I could have done that without the gear, but it's a whole different mindset because you can have utmost confidence in your gear a lot of the time. Maybe not utmost confidence, like when you're putting your own protection and stuff, it can be a little bit tentative, but that's still, I guess, a mental safety net as much as a physical one. Whereas free climbing, all your confidence has got to be in just what you're dealing with, your body and your mind, right? And one crack in that is a whole.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you, I mean, you find that a lot of people say that there is a definite immediacy and you have to be completely present whilst climbing because especially at harder grades it's so precise that just a slight body movement is just going to kick you off the wall, and
Right.
that's that. And trying to do that at a high level, that's just the next level thing. I mean, whenever you speak about climbing to anyone, they'll always go, have you seen free solo? And the answer is yes, I've seen free solo, please stop asking. uh, and watching Alex Honnold do that, I mean, it's crazy just to the average person, but for most people who know a bit about climbing and know a bit about the route he took, that's something that takes people 3 or 4 days to complete. Like doing El Capitan is like what 2,500, 3,000 feet of rock, and it's all really hard climbing. So most people just camp out on the ledge and then do it in a few days.
Yeah.
He does that in 4 hours, and trying to do that then solo, like no protection. Most climbers you speak to go, that's insane.
See,
No one is likely to repeat that anytime
that
soon.
went completely the opposite way that I thought it was going to go. Where you were like, yeah, so the average person that looks insane, but if you ask a climber, you'll know he did an easy climb, he took an easy route or something like that. That was the complete opposite. I mean that gives me even more respect for. I mean, yeah, free solo especially is some of those climbs are just. I can't I can't even imagine it. Like you said, to the average person it seems nuts. So the fact that it's even more kind of ridiculous to a climber is, I guess, says even more about feats like that. Because I think that you sometimes see, climbers or people in that community who like, I don't want to say, hate, but they sort of discourage or reject free climbing because it's dangerous. But I feel like someone in that situation, surely he's done that climb assisted with as much gear as possible. Surely, like a handful of times at the very least, right? I mean, you can't imagine. Like you
Oh,
said, usually takes people days. He did the whole thing in 4 hours. Like he's done it a lot, right?
that's just it. The amount of preparation that actually went into Alex Honnold free soloing El Cap was about 2 years of actual work. Not just training for it, not just doing the route repeatedly. It's you're making notes in a notebook of each individual move, how to pull on it. You're going up with massive rucksacks and haul bags, taking out loose rocks on the route just in case. Like there is so much time and effort that actually went into him doing it, that and then still doing it is insane.
Yeah.
But it's even someone who climbs that without a rope and goes, yeah, that's a cool thing to do. will take as many precautions as possible to make it safe before they do it.
Yeah, and
And
this isn't
that
in any way
is,
to take away from it. It's if anything, it gives you more appreciation for it. I'm not,
yeah,
because someone you just physically could not do that without probably hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of prep, like in a
no,
situation like that, right? And
no way.
so, everyone's seen the finished result and everyone thinks it looks mad, and then but you know, you're never going to master anything without putting in thousands of hours, obviously, and to do something like that is going to have been a huge amount of preparation. Um, I feel a weird little sidetrack, but um, it's it's a ridiculous feat, right? Do you have any interest in like Everest or Kilimanjaro or something like that? Like, are any of those on your bucket list?
I'd love to go and do like I think they're called 14ers, where they're peaks above 14,000 feet in the Alps.
Right.
So I'd love to go try some of that and do some like bigger alpine climbing,
Mm-hmm.
because again, it's a completely new skill set that I've had no real exposure to, which is like alpinism and mixed ice climbing, which
Right.
it's
Yeah.
just a completely different ball game, where the skills that I have now kind of come into play, but there's so much extra on top. There's so many more hazards as well. It's yeah, it's
Yeah.
great.
Ice
It's
is a
there
very
again,
different
different
beast,
ball
right?
game.
Yeah. In fact, that's an interesting point as well. It makes you wonder how, like, I guess it would be a whole process just to begin with, even learning that skill set, because you can't do it here, surely. Like, there's nowhere in the UK that you're going to learn ice climbing really to any degree.
Yeah, yeah. There's Scotland. In
Really?
Scotland, there's some bits and yeah, there's some bits of like most national parks you'll find will have some form of ice climbing, but yeah, Scotland will do it until like early into like February, some places March if they're lucky,
Ooh.
where you can get away with doing like ice climbing and stuff.
If you ever give that a shot, it better be posted everywhere because that sounds terrifying.
Oh yeah, it will be. Don't worry, I'll let everyone know.
Yeah. Um. Anything coming up in the near future for climbs that you're trying to tackle?
So there are a couple of things that I want to get ticked off this year.
Yeah.
There is an island in the Bristol Channel called Lundy. Now, I don't know if anyone's heard of it. It's probably not. It's a very small place, but there is absolutely fantastic sea cliff climbing in there.
Right.
And one of the classic climbs is a massive like slab of rock called the Devil's Slide. It's about 450 feet long, and it's again just a pretty smooth but yet pretty shallow bit of climbing that just looks absolutely fantastic.
Have you done any
Like
sea cliff climbing before?
no,
Oh.
no, it's completely new to me. The problem is a lot of the time with sea cliff climbing, you're at the behest of the BMC, which is the British Mountain Council, because they worked a lot with like bird watching and things like that for nesting birds. And
Right.
if there's nesting birds, they normally put a post somewhere say you can't climb at these crags. Which, well, to be fair, most crags you'll find have some sort of access restrictions one way or another, because you most of the time climbing on private property. No matter where you go, even if it's sea cliffs, it's probably private property.
So are you saying fuck them, or are you saying
Not fuck them so much. It's normally a case of the BMC, which do a lot, which handle most of like the legal things in terms of like uh, access rights
yeah?
and climbing on private property. They'll go in and try and sweeten the deal. So it'd just be like, look, come on now, we're not going to damage the property. But some people are like, yep, that's fine. Some people are like, not really, or like, let us know if you do come in. We only want a certain number of people.
Right.
But the BMC are fantastic at trying to get people on to the climbers side of
Yeah, I was gonna say
things.
they're on your side as it is, right? So it's kind of in their interest to sort of open those opportunities up for climbers anyway. Now, something because you sent me a document beforehand, which I really appreciate. First of all, because usually I'm kind of brainstorming topics to talk about and stuff like that, but you just went straight, dumped a bunch of things, first things off the top of your head that we might be able to touch on. So with that
Yeah,
in
I'm a little
mind,
swot.
yeah. With that in mind, exactly what we just talked about with things like nesting birds and stuff like that, there's a little topic here on ethics. And you mentioned before that you're a trad climber, which is where you make your own protection and stuff like that. And whereas it's sports climbing, where it's already built into the rocks and stuff. So
Yeah.
I guess there's some kind of I guess a little bit of an ethics sort of difference there, because you mentioned here that like leaving no trace is quite an important part of kind of the mentality when climbing. So yeah, I guess just take us through the ethics of rock climbing and where sort of how that's seen differently.
Yeah, well, so in the UK, the BMC have pretty strict guidelines on it now, where you can only bolt certain types of rock. So, like limestone or granite is something that you can do. They won't let you touch like sandstone or like the gritstone of the peaks or rhyolite. Rhyolite in particular, because you can't drill into it, it makes the bolt extremely brittle and unsafe.
Right.
Uh, but it's also a lot to do with the fact that we're not the only ones using that space. A lot of the time, there's hikers or there's campers or sightseers. Like, it's not right for climbers just to then go through with a great big hammer drill, rappel down, and just chug big holes into the wall. Like, it's unsightly because you can just see islets from a mile away.
Yeah.
Like they're shining on a rock. So a lot of people now are just like here to do trad, unless it's like a quarry. Normally you can get away with it in there because again, unless you're climbing, you're not off to a just use quarry.
Right. Yeah. It's not
Really.
much of a sightseeing spot, and not to mention, they're places that have already been absolutely brutalized by sort of by man. So I'm
Yeah.
sure it's not going to be too much of an issue. So rules like that, I guess, change depending on where you are. National parks in the US and stuff like that. But I guess so you mentioned that there are a couple of rock types in the UK that one is brittle and unsafe. But is there anything that stands out about the ones that are okay? Like, are they particularly safe, or are they just not really found in places that there are sightseers, or do these rules change depending on where you are? Like, are there going to be certain points in the UK that it's just a complete no go? Like, what are the rules there?
So again, it kind of varies from place to place.
Yeah,
If it's private property, they're like, and they're happy for you to do it, go ahead. Or if it's somewhere that's already been bolted, they'll usually allow you to rebolt and shear the old ones for safety reasons. Where a lot of stuff that was like fitted in the 80s or 90s just isn't safe anymore because they use like poor quality steel or like resin that doesn't quite fit the bolt properly, and so it
yeah,
slides out. So they're happy to rebolt a lot of stuff. But in terms of like if there is a reason for why they can't do it in terms of the rock type, yeah, sometimes it's just not safe to do, or if there's the rock that can be done, a lot of the times it's just nice to keep it as traditional because again, it's just leaving a trace and just putting your imprint in nature where it doesn't need to be.
yeah. Right. Where I think weirdly in more recent years I think that's become a topic that people are more conscious of generally. Where I imagine 50 years ago or something, well, there probably weren't even the regulations to care about that sort of thing because climbing wasn't as big then, and then suddenly there's islets popping up all over the all over the British Isles, and people are like, okay, well, maybe we've got to do something about this.
Mm. Well, I mean, touching back very quickly on the history of climbing, some of the
Yeah,
first people to do it were the lads from Sheffield at a place called Raventor, just in the south end of the Peak District, which is lots of like world class limestone climbing. But they were then sending it on bolts, which a lot of people were up in arms about.
right,
But once you realise that it's a small section of the UK, and some some climbs you just can't put protection in because it gets to a point where you're so far above your last bit of gear. So like the distance between where you are and your last piece of gear is called your run out,
right,
and it's not uncommon in like trad climbing, especially in the Peak District, where you have quite long runouts for the amount of for the distance you are from the floor, and there's that very real possibility of if your belayer isn't on point, you could hit the deck.
right,
And so sometimes in the interest of safety, where people are going to climb it, putting at least one or two bolts near the bottom or one or two bolts at the top so you can place an anchor at the top.
Right.
is just essential.
Because yeah, you rather than having a whole run of them up the cliff face or something, I guess to avoid people running into that issue where there is like big gaps from sort of their your last piece of protection to the next. Yeah, it's in the interest of safety. If it's somewhere that a lot of people are going to be climbing, I'm sure no one's going to be too mad about one or two, just to stop people dying, I guess.
Pretty much.
Give me a second here. So, where sort of internationally interests you the most in terms of sort of rock climbing potential? Like outside of the UK, what's the next step? Outside of the Alps for things like ice climbing, what really piques your interest?
Well, I think for me, like Yosemite National Park in the States is like the end game, like the mecca of like big wall trad climbing.
Right.
Like the features are absolutely insane. I mean, you look at like Half Dome or El Cab, and they're just these huge monoliths just coming out of the ground that are just blank sheets of rock, like no grass particularly on them. Like it's just all rock, and it's all yeah, just really interesting features.
Looks
And
like something
yeah, just it's
out of the Barrens in WoW. Yeah, when you
yeah,
like
straight up.
literally just fucking monolith. Like, where do they come from? It's just they're kind of like, well, I was gonna say like stalagmites, but no, because stalagmites have kind of come to a point. They're like bluffs, I guess.
Yeah.
Just huge rock cylinders just sitting there, just begging to be climbed.
Oh, mama, they are definitely begging to be climbed, and it's one of those things where you could do like 5 routes every day for the rest of your life, and you still wouldn't scratch the surface of what could be done there. Which, for a lot of people, is like the main appeal for climbing. Is it's so open ended, you can just do so much with it.
Even on one sort of particular rock face, you can tackle it so many different sorts of ways.
Yeah.
How much would something like that cost? Like a trip out to Yosemite? I mean, flights alone, a couple thousand. But do you need any kind of? I guess do you need any sort of permits or anything like that? Because it's national park. I don't know if they have like rules around climbing there, or if you need permits to climb there and stuff like that.
You need certain permits in Yosemite to climb and hike up some of the more popular routes. I
Right.
know Half Dome, you have to pay. I don't know if it's you have to pay, but you definitely have to get a ticket from the ranger station to be able to go up on peak times. Not so much like in off-peak seasons because it's winter and cold and raining, and no one wants to walk up like slick granite in December, really. But yeah, definitely in the summer months, you'd probably need a permit. In terms of the equipment you need when you're taking up this when you're scaling up the size of the wall you're climbing, the gear also scales up with you.
Yeah.
Like it just becomes like prohibitively expensive to a lot of people because like uh, my rack of gear there maybe all in all comes to about £450, £500 at top.
Right.
Whereas when you need to big wall, it's not just the gear that you're wearing around you, it's the extra ropes that you need to carry up your haul bag. It's the haul bag, it's all of your food, all of your water, like a massive PVC pipe that you poo into because you can't just go off the edge. You have to take into account every bit of like existing as well as the climbing
Yeah.
when you're doing a big wall like that because you're living on the wall, so you have to.
Living on the wall. That's got to be a someone's biography name right there. Surely.
Oh yeah, there is some dickhead climber with that, and his name is just the mountain emoji.
That's the cover of the book. Mountain emoji, living on the wall by mountain emoji, comma mountain emoji. When you're going up with the gear that you're putting in to sort of make sure you don't die, does the last person have to bring it all up? Do you leave it in until you're done with the climb? What's the deal with that?
So generally speaking, you'll you'll have your lead climber going up placing the gear.
Right.
They'll then at the top set an anchor, and then you'll have the person on the ground who's your second. Yeah, follow up and remove the gear as you go, and then give it back to their lead climber, or if they're then leading on the next pitch, they'll keep around their gear loops
Right,
and
because
then just continue on their way.
at the point you've got an anchor, I guess you don't need the gear in the wall anymore, right? Is
No,
that how that works?
exactly, because the when you're lead climbing, the belay is beneath you and the rope is also going down.
Right.
So there is only tension when you've fallen or when you're below the clip. But once you're up there and you've got an anchor set up, the second person is always beneath that clip
Yeah.
because you're then pulling them up from the top.
Right.
So there's always tension on that rope.
So yeah, so the point of climbing and putting all the gear in place and essentially that's for the most part when you're the lead climber or solo climbing, I guess. Which,
Yeah.
I mean, again, it sounds like a scary experience because if something goes wrong, there's not even anyone there to call a fucking ambulance. But
So there is such a thing called rope soloing,
yeah,
which is you're on your own. You have a automatic belay like attached to your hip, which you then feed your slack through. So if you
right,
fall, you're kind of in a closed loop system. So as you fall, that catches and snags you up.
right. Rather than having someone at the
Now,
bottom kind of managing your rope.
yeah. Now the issue with that is you still have all of your gear beneath you. So what you have to do when you get to the top and set up your anchor is then abseil down, remove all of the gear, and then you have to climb back up off of the rope using it's called jumaring, where you
Right.
essentially have like little like grippers that grip to the rope and allow you to pull yourself up.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's like seeing that shit in Call of Duty and stuff. Where you like, oh, actually
This
no.
shit is just like Call of Duty.
Well, yeah. The thing I'm picturing is like the automated one that you got with zip lines on Warzone. You know what I'm talking about? Where it's like
Yeah,
a fucking motorized like wheel that you go onto the rope with.
yeah. I mean, it's not motorized. It is just like
Yeah,
a grip. It's like a friction hitch
yeah.
kind of thing.
Do you have any other? Do you have any other weird exercise tools outside of your resistance bands? I remember when I was
Oh,
younger, my brother had this. It was a little sphere with like a gyroscope in it,
oh
and you'd
yeah,
spin it around, and the gyroscope would create
and
resistance to
it's
strengthen
for your
your.
forearm.
Yeah.
I have just your old school style like gripper,
Mm-hmm.
where it's just
You squeeze
that's
it.
again that's spot on if you want to like build your forearm. And then I have this egg. Wait, this egg here. It's small. It's just very squishy. There's a lot of
It's
resistance
like a
to it,
stress toy.
but it's a stress toy. But they're again really good for recovery because
Yeah.
they can't let you go through too much of a range of motion, but you can still apply pressure, which
Interesting.
you find a lot of climbers universally are recovering from some form of injury one way or another.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
now my middle finger on my right hand, I kind of fucked that up putting it into a little pocket the other day. Now it hurts to like bend or put too much pressure on. Like, but you'll find that finger pulley injuries and tendonitis are things that climbers frequently get. They're like the common ones. And yeah, just doing like resistance exercises or antagonistic exercises are really good ways of making sure you don't get injured. But who wants to prepare when you could do loads and loads of pull-ups and get really strong?
Right. Right. Yeah. Exactly. That sounds like more fun. I'm sure. I still pull-ups are the bane of my existence. A couple times through the last few years, I've sort of gone through a phase of like, oh, I'm gonna work out and I'm gonna get fit, and I've got a pull-up bar, and it's pull-ups will be the death of me every single time. And the worst bit is how fast it regresses. So it's like you work up slowly until I can like, oh, I can do a couple sets of 5 pull-ups. But then if I don't
Yeah.
do them for like a month, I can't do 2 again. I just can't even. Yeah. Um. I actually have. Now this is a personal bias, but I have a very underappreciative view of UK wildlife because I think we have some of the shittest wildlife going. Right. Um. You seen anything interesting out there on your climbs? Anything, or hikes? Anything that stands out? Anything that really struck you, and you were like, "Wow, this place is beautiful," or is it as shit as I imagine?
I think UK wildlife is great. First and foremost, I think it takes a real moment to sit there and appreciate it. But once you realize that there is beauty everywhere in a lot of places that you wouldn't expect it, it is fantastic. I think the best example for this is like Scotland. People will always say Scotland is beautiful, and that's with good reason because everything there is like vast or huge. But then you sort of go from that macro and zoom go right in, and then you realize there's like really interesting sorts of like lichen, or you'll just see deer just wandering through the forest if you're wild camping. Like, yeah, there is so much to the UK. Like the wildlife, I don't think in terms of like animals is that varied, just because we don't have stuff like bears or wolves, which
The one thing that I will say you gotta love about British wildlife when it comes to animals is that it's safe for the most part. You're not gonna get like there's no bears. You're not gonna get bitten by a fucking snake that's gonna kill you potentially.
that's not quite true. There's adders in Dartmoor. There are snakes still in the UK. Well, there's a snake in the UK that you can
That
find in
is
certain places down
potentially
south.
dangerous.
Yeah, yeah, it's a venomous snake.
I didn't know that. I thought the only snakes we had were like grass snakes and those things that aren't technically snakes. That I always say is roundworms, but it's not roundworms. Slow worms. I think we have
Hmm.
slow worms, which are pretty cool.
Yeah, slow worms are pretty hype. We have loads of really interesting bird wildlife. That's one
Mm.
thing that I will say. That you'll find a lot of like coastal climbers have got a really good eye from like a mile away and go, oh yeah, cormorant, and like they'll just be able to name off rip because a lot of the times they're kind of bitter towards birds because they stop them from climbing certain
Yeah, right.
areas.
You don't want to fuck up their nests
Yeah.
or whatever, that sort of shit. Can you climb the White Cliffs of Dover?
I wouldn't want to because it's chalk, so it's really brittle. Where you can climb though, which I think is an interesting one, is Cheddar Gorge. Cheddar
I think
Gorge
I've
is a
been to
UNESCO
Cheddar Gorge
World,
actually.
yeah, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and they
Right.
still let you climb on it, which I think is a pretty unique feature about it. I
Have
don't
you
think you
have you
can climb
been?
on many World Heritage. No, I would love to go though. There's some really cool sport climbing there.
Oh hell yeah. Yeah, it was just White Cliffs of Dover. I mean, they're right there. They're big cliffs. Why not? But yeah, they are made of chalk, so probably a questionable climb. Um, oh man, I'm just looking at this document. Everything we've got bullet points. I'm trying to think because I'm pretty erratic when I do this fucking podcast, and sometimes to my detriment. So I look through this and like we could have broken stuff down in order, but it's just been this kind of messy sort of offshoots of all different kinds of conversations. So
Oh,
we talked
hell yeah, bro.
about how you got into climbing, right? Just middle of lockdown, invited along by a friend, and then sort of got into it from there. How would you recommend other people get into climbing if they're interested out there? Where should they start? Any advice there?
I think now, over the past maybe year or so, post Tokyo Olympics for sure, there's been a massive uptick in the number of new climbers, and gyms are your best place. They really are. You'll find that they're full of really knowledgeable people. They're all really friendly, and it's just a great place to learn to safely do the sport at first.
Yeah,
And not only is it a safe place, if you're starting out on your own, you'll find people to climb with really, really quickly. Like,
which is important when obviously when you're starting out because you need other people essentially
yeah,
to help you climb.
yeah, exactly. Like, you'll definitely find that you'll find new climbers, especially if you're doing like uh, beginners or improvers sessions, because there'll be groups of people at the same time that you'll speak to. And climbing is, for a lot of it's like bits of where you're feeling very alone on a wall. It's an incredibly social sport on the
Yeah,
side of it. It really is. So those sorts of people there you'll find super quick. And then from that point, once you got yourself into a gym, you just start climbing. Like gyms know there's new climbers, so they put up loads of routes that are easily done, like not too like sketchy or scary, or like doesn't require a lot of balance, and they just get you used to it. And like I've had people who have like started climbing with me and gone for like maybe like a month or so and go, I'm thinking about training my finger strength and things like that. And at that point, you just need to go climb, just get some mileage on the wall,
yeah.
and Just get out there, like especially if you're doing like bouldering or like stuff that requires a pad instead of a rope. Like just get out and do
Oh,
more of it.
all right. What's the difference between a pad and a rope, and what is bouldering?
So okay, yeah, let's back it up a hot second.
Okay.
Uh, so bouldering is a discipline where instead of using like a big cliff face, you'll just use a small boulder that's maybe no more than 4 or 5 meters tall,
Right.
and you won't use a rope. You'll have crash mats underneath you,
Right.
and a lot bouldering focuses more on uh, hard moves and technique rather than like how long can you go for or how strong are you like on a long route. So that's where bouldering usually is, and by far it's the most popular like discipline to climb because it's so easy to do. You don't need a partner, you don't need any safety equipment per se. You can just sort of turn up to a boulder field and go, or
It's
turn up to
just
the gym with
man
just your
versus
shoes.
rock
Yeah,
with nothing but a crash mat.
hell yeah.
Have you done bouldering as well?
Yeah, so I boulder more than I do any other type of climbing
Right.
because like it's so easy to finish work at like 4:35 p.m. Just like chuck my shoes in my rucksack and walk to the gym,
Right.
and just like you can get like dozens of climbs done in a very short time. Whereas if I was lead climbing, you could maybe get 10 in if you're like in a 3 hour period if you're really fast about it.
Right. And I guess that makes
So,
it makes sense as well because, like you said, you can do it alone easily enough, and it's one of those things where, yeah, even though you're not working out, just doing shit like that is gonna develop everything that you need to climb in the first place, from sort of like a muscular standpoint as well as sort of a skills standpoint and everything like that. Um, it's like I don't even know what I would compare it to. It's like climbing light, I guess, like without so much of the hassle, but still with all of the action.
yeah, exactly. And you find most competitions now are focusing more on bouldering because you can do more with it. You can get a lot more dynamic range of movements in because you're not wearing a rope, so you're not behest to your belayer or like like the physics of how you're gonna like take a fall and do like a massive swing or something.
Right.
Like uh, in terms of like trends, a lot more of competition climbing is focusing less on like very slow, like we call it static climbing, where you've got like a lot of contact, a lot of control, and you're slowly moving from one hold to the other.
Like that
Like,
game on the QWOP website called GURP. Do you ever play that?
yes, just like GURP,
Yeah.
actually. You just unlocked a memory there. That's weird. So yeah, that style of climbing is being sort of pushed to the side in like elite competitions for more parkour style, like dynamic movement, where you're like throwing yourself at a small hole, slapping it just to get a bit more momentum, and then grabbing onto another one.
Yeah, I think I saw some shit on TikTok, weirdly enough, recently, of some guy doing some like weird, mad, difficult climb where he's on a climbing wall like in a gym, and you can see all the different grips, but he's like not actually climbing using the grips at all. There's like sticky out parts of the wall itself that he's using to sort of friction and sort of we
Yeah.
do mad jumps and stuff to climb up. Yeah, I think I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, because it's a lot more exciting, right? I guess. I mean, as a competition and as a spectator thing as well, it's a lot more exciting than watching a guy very meticulously kind of and safely make his way up a rock face. I just realized that
Yeah.
I don't know what is in the background. It looks like a whiteboard, but I can see myself. Do you see what I'm talking
Oh.
about?
Oh, what? There.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. No, that is the stream on the side, just on my spare monitor. There you go.
yeah. But what is it
That's
reflected in? A
uh,
picture
it's
frame?
yeah, it's just a picture frame.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that threw me for a second. Um. Well, I mean, you've been sat here this whole time with that fucking chest of drawers with a bunch of shit on top of it, right? Do you want to take us through bit by bit what you might take on the average climb? and I'll do
For
my
sure.
best to describe as much of it to the listeners as possible. Anyone who's listening, anything sort of any visual representations, I hope to get up on Instagram. So keep an eye out for that, and I'll
Wait,
post them on Instagram so you have an idea what everything looks like. Otherwise, you can watch the video versions on YouTube and on Twitch as well.
so let me just get a bit of.
Yeah, the lights are coming
Oh
up.
God. Yeah. There we are. Is that better? So I
Yeah,
just realized it
beautiful.
got very dark for a second. So, uh, first and foremost, you want to make sure you have safety equipment. It's always, it sounds like ridiculous and kind of corny and like what an instructor would say, but I always make sure I pack like my helmet and my harness before I pack anything else.
Yeah.
Because although you don't particularly need a helmet, I've had a lot of friends who have had horror stories where people haven't worn a helmet and got themselves severely injured.
I mean,
So
the last thing you talked about, you already had rocks and shit fall on your head in a quarry.
yeah,
So I mean, that's one great example of why a helmet's useful.
exactly. So this one, super basic, has a Ludwig sticker on the back, but that's a custom. Yeah, they could take pretty heavy falls. And could get pretty beat up. But once they start showing like a bit of wear, you kind of want to get them changed. But yeah, crash helmets are pretty bomber stuff, pretty basics. Now, rope, you go through an insane amount of rope for various things. Now, I have two types of rope. I have a white rope here, which is called semi-static, and then I have a red rope in the background, which is a dynamic rope.
Right.
Now, you never want to climb using a semi-static rope because I mean it's like braking slowly in a car versus like emergency stopping.
There's like no
The,
elasticity in it or anything.
there's no elasticity and the force is a lot greater and they have less time to dissipate.
Right.
So you can find that if you were to try to take a fall on this, I mean, you'd either break your back or break the rope. Whereas with that,
Right.
with the red rope, direct rope, generally speaking, they can stretch an extra 40% of what their current, like their default length is.
Right.
So it gives you plenty of time and a nice soft landing. That stuff that is just like the very basics. Now, moving away from that, the next thing you want to focus on is a harness. Now, again, you want one that's very comfortable. I have an absolutely fantastic one from DMM. Shout out to DMM. Please sponsor me. That would be great. Now, yeah, you find that they're composed of two things, hip belt and then leg loops.
Yeah.
And they come together at the front. So then, yeah, you have a nice arch back once you put load into it. Now, this is, again, whether you're doing like trad or if you're just doing like sport, dependent on that is how many gear loops you have on a
Right.
harness. So this one has a fair few and they're quite big because I take shitloads of stuff up the wall with me. So, but again, it's personal preference. If you're, well, so there's a discipline called speed climbing. It's going off on a slight tangent here,
No,
but
yeah,
I
take
want
it away.
to dunk on some nerds. Speed climbing is where the wall is the same. It has been the same since 2007. The holds have never moved. They had a slight design change on two of the hold types that are on the wall in 2015. But other than that, the wall's been the same ever since. And the goal is just to get to the top of the wall as fast as possible. I think the world record is about 5.03, something crazy fast like that.
Wait,
However,
seconds.
seconds.
Okay. Right.
It's a super dynamic way of climbing, but it gets to a point where it's muscle memory.
Yeah.
Because you're just doing the same thing over and over. But yeah, it's kind of the joke of the climbing world because you're doing the same thing over and over. Try a different route, you nerd.
Oh yeah,
Like,
speed running. You know how you gotta. If the route doesn't change, then the method's never going to change, right? Until someone figures out that if you carry out arbitrary code execution on one of them, you skip to the credits.
that's the thing. No, this is where the speedrunning aspect comes into it. In 2019, there is a God, I can't remember his full name. It's a Japanese boulderer who's on their Japanese Olympics team.
Right.
Is it Narasaki Tomoa, something like that. But there is now something called the Tomoa skip in speed climbing,
Oh
where he
my
found,
god.
yeah, exactly. He found a way where you could skip one of the holds by just starting the climb in a different manner and like using his legs to force his body to the next hold instead
Right.
of like slowly reaching. He just jumps, and that shaved. I think it shaved like a half second off the record at that time.
Yeah,
Which
I mean, literally into video game speedrunning sort of uh, finesse at this point. You know, shaving half seconds. He shaved a couple frames. I mean, that's all it takes, though, right? Especially like you said, the route never changes. All it took was him starting from a slightly different spot, you know, and half second shaved off because he's fucking throwing himself halfway up the wall to begin with. Um, anyway, anyway,
yeah, that was
so
a horrible tangent
yeah,
just to mock speed climbers.
off of speed climbing, do something else,
Yeah.
nerds. Harness.
Anyway, yeah, harnesses. So great bit of kit. Find a comfortable one, and you'll thank yourself when you've been sat in it for 45 minutes watching your friend just do the same move over and over again. That's just like the because whilst you're wearing this to climb, you'll also be using it to belay from.
Yes.
So, which leads me to the next bit of kit, which is ATC. So this is my one. It's pretty nifty, very basic. You can get really cool ones that automatically lock up when they feel like a tension on the rope. Uh, they're they're good, but they're not good for beginners. I
Right.
find there's just a bit too much of a moving part and a lot of a different technique that people aren't used to. But they're a super simple bit of kit. Grab a length of rope. Oh, audio listeners, eat shit, I guess.
Yeah, we've got some complex rope techniques going on with a carabiner and belaying gear.
Yeah. So your rope goes through the tube at the top, and then you clip the carabiner through the rope and the ATC. So then when a climber takes a fall, that system locks up, because you're attached to that.
Yeah,
You're then stopping them from hitting the deck and dying, and it feels good to do that.
yeah. You're the counterweight there, essentially.
Yeah, but I mean, these things have an insane amount of use. Not only can you use them for belaying, you can use them to start hauling up equipment. You can
Right.
use them to abseil from. Like they're kind of like the one-stop shop for getting around, moving on a rope.
And moving on rope safely, obviously. Yeah. The multi-tool for being safe on rope.
Yeah. We love safety because as much as it's one of those things where people think, oh, you climb, you do something reckless. No, that's the thing.
90% of
Like
the practice is the opposite of that, pretty much.
so much of this sport is just making sure you're safe before you actually do the thing you want to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, part of the fun is all like making anchors and doing like rigging and rope work. So
And especially, you know, when you're leading a climb, like you said, I mean, it's not just yourself, right? I mean, there's people kind of under your responsibility. You got to make sure that, you know, the anchor is as safe as it possibly can be, because there are other people relying on you to make that climb as well. And then, you know,
precisely.
that whole aspect is a sort of, there's a camaraderie to it, and you know, so it's not reckless. It's you're responsible for your own safety and sometimes the safety of others, and that's a hugely important part of the sport.
Yeah, for sure. And in lieu of safety, we have just an entire rack of equipment that I'm going to quickly buzz through. There's a whole bunch of
Yeah.
it that I could go talk about for hours.
This thing is nuts.
Why?
I mean, looking at it, it is just like ropes and carabiners and fucking
Yeah.
God knows what else.
So let's start with the basics. So we have carabiners. Now there's three types that are on the rack, really. So you have your screw gates, which
Right?
are big, thick, chunky ones, but they have a mechanism that you can twist up and lock so you can't open it again.
Yeah.
Now, they're the things that you want to put on critical bits of like the setup. So you put them onto your anchors, you attach them to yourself if you're ever tying into anything,
Right.
just to make sure. Beyond that, you have snap gates, which are again they're big hunks of metal, but they don't have a locker. And then the newer trendier one is wire gates, which you find on most sport routes nowadays, which are just normal carabiners, but they have a thin wire, and it makes it super easy just to get a rope in. Like,
Yeah, you can just
on a straw.
like slip it right in there.
yeah, you just get your thumb and roll it straight in. Right. So beyond that, we have intrad climbing. You use an insane amount of slings. Slings, you throw them around rocks. You tie them into your anchor points to create anchors and clip to them. Generally speaking, they're made out of two different materials. You find nylon ones, which are like pretty old school, but again, times have changed. Most slings you find nowadays are made out of a substance called Dyneema. Now,
Right.
Dyneema is insanely strong. Pound for pound, I think it's like 3-4 times as strong as steel. Doesn't absorb any water, can't be dyed, just mega strong, perfect for setting up anchors and just doing static work. Now, they do have their drawbacks, like the static rope. They don't have any give in them whatsoever. They're super static, so you can't shock load them because it doesn't matter how strong they aren't going to take the fall of you falling like a meter onto
Right.
them.
Either they won't or you won't, and that's not what you want at the end of the day.
But well, the thing is, like, it may break your back, but it's still going to snap the sling and you're going to fall.
Yeah.
Like, that's just the long and short of it. They're, yeah. But again, you find most bits of kit here super strong unless they're used improperly. Going past that, then, we have our first bits of gear that we put into the rock. So, when you approach a crack, you'll tend to look for the size of it, and then you'll go through your carabiner full of nuts. Now, nuts are fantastic. They come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. So these ones you can fit into relatively small bits of rock, and they just sort of slot in. You pull down on them, make sure they don't go anywhere, and they will hold an insane amount of weight.
So
Normally, the thing
you find a crack, and then you slide it in, and then I guess, I mean, how do you actually make sure it's going to fit and stay in a crack, right? Because it looks, I don't even know. I mean, are you slotting it in at one end of the crack and then pulling it across so that it's locked in? Like, what's the
what you want to do is you want to go in as deep as you can, and then once you're deep into that crack, you want to pull on it, and when you pull on it, it may, if you should, slot in. So I don't know if you'll be able to get it on camera, but you see how it's offset on one side, one's concave, one's convex.
Yeah.
You could use that as a sort of method of twisting it in, and again, I'm using the word camming a lot because that is just the forces that holds most of your gear in.
Right.
It's just camming motions where it twists into the rock, and that's how it keeps itself in. Now, a lot of the time, because again, if they're offset, it'll find natural like ebbs and flows and slight like choke points in the rock, and it'll catch them, and they're super solid. Like, the rock is going to break before this wire does.
Yeah.
Which is why normally when you're climbing, you'll put in a few relatively close to each other if you know you're going to then do like a long run out with a big fall potential, because the forces are just greater, so there's a greater chance of you popping this out of the rock.
Right. So yeah, you just throw in a few extra for extra security.
Yeah. And then going up the scale of it, we have huge chocks.
Yeah, I think that was the first thing when you held up that massive fucking bundle of ropes. That was the first thing I saw that was like, what is that?
Yeah, again, they're just big bits of metal that you throw into larger cracks. Now, size does matter in comparison. Like, the difference between like this and say one of those small micro nuts that you could put in a thin crack is those micro nuts are way more likely to pop out than this. Like, if you can find a crack deep enough, generally speaking, these don't get a lot of use, especially this great big honking beast.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times it's not practical to take up with you, when there'd be better, there's smaller placements that would do pretty much the same job. So
I mean, yeah. So for anyone listening, there's three. What are they? There's three like metal prisms.
So they're hexes.
Of hex-shaped sort of prisms with ropes slotted through them. Varying in size from like probably a couple inches across to like 5 or 6 inches across. These things, they
Yeah.
look sturdy. I mean, they are just massive hunks of metal.
Yeah, and I'm holding it like I've caught a fucking big mouth bass. But yeah, so then just going beyond that, I've already shown you the cams. But the cams are, again, I've got a fair few different sizes because they're just so simple to use. You just stick them in a rock, like twist it, bang, let go, give it a jiggle, make sure that they're not walking.
Yeah.
Because again, going back to the theme of if used properly, they're safe.
Right.
If you don't, like sometimes you see how you can independently move the jaws on them,
Right.
and that can sometimes lead them to like come offset or like wonky, and then as you're moving up the wall and you're like tugging on the gear, it can walk itself out,
Right.
which is super dangerous. Like if it's not properly in there, because once
I'm
it
sure
walks out,
that can happen with pretty
it's
much any of this equipment, right? Like,
yeah,
as long as you're not certain of you run that risk.
yeah, it's a lot harder to do in like vertical cracks where you're placing like big shocks.
Yeah.
But yeah, in like horizontal cracks where you're placing gear and it can move side to side, it's so common just for it to come out.
Right. Right. Oh god. I keep drinking because it's hot, and I'm running into the same issue that I did on the podcast with Sage, where I think my bladder's about to burst. But I mean, looking at the clock, we're at about the hour and a half point, which I think, as far as podcasts go, I think is about the same length as every other episode so far. So I mean, with the gear rundown and a couple of your I don't know, aspirations, especially, I think the things that sounded super interesting to me. I would love, dude. I hope someday you get to climb like the Alps, do ice climbing in the Alps. That'd be fucking amazing, right?
Me too, man.
But yeah, I mean, I see. Getting to the end of the podcast, everything that was talked about, I want to give it a try, but I know that I'm not going to be able to until next year, probably at the earliest. So I honestly think I'm gonna say, like, if you're listening or if you're watching, watch this space, because at some point definitely we'll strike out, and I'll see if I can get myself up a wall at some point and try and record the whole thing. But yeah, thanks for coming on, man, and talking all about it. I honestly not a guest I expected when I was kind of coming up with the idea for the podcast, but it's been great. It's been great having you on. So
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, of course. And everyone, thanks for watching and thanks for listening. I hope you all learned some stuff here. I know I did. And yeah, I'll see you all next week for hopefully an episode with the creator of the Storm Chasers podcast, which we had Dallas on last episode, who's one of the voice actors from it. So that should be fun. But yeah, Ollie, thanks for coming on, man.
It's been a pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
All right. Peace.